I just want to reread the whole series. G'day to all you lovely people and welcome back to my channel. It's over. My Malazan journey is over, or at least my journey with the Malazan Book of the Fallen series by Steven Erikson. I know that there are other books in this universe which I am going to read, but my journey with the Big Ten is done. It was at least a month ago, I think, that I read the final book, The Crippled God. And it's taken me all this time to kind of feel like, okay, I think I'm ready to talk about it. And I have to admit, I am feeling ambivalent. Not in a bad way, only in the sense that I feel this almost depression that it's over with, that I am done with the Book of the Fallen. And yet I'm also extremely satisfied as to how the series has concluded. And on top of that, I'm also really struggling not to just reread the entire series. I just want to immerse myself in this world again. Apparently I'm not alone in that, because I thought I was insane. I just finished the series and yet I want to reread it. However, in my experience, when you read a long series in particular that you have been loving, where you have felt so immersed in the story, have become attached to the characters, it always leaves me with this feeling of, I don't want it to end. I just want more. I always want more. So it's not surprising that I am feeling a little down that this journey is done. Now, before I start talking about The Crippled God, the final book in Malazan the Book of the Fallen, I wanted to thank all of you who have been watching my videos and commenting. When I started reviewing the series, I don't think I fully appreciated what kind of fandom there is out there in relation to the series. And you have all made my journey so much the richer. You have helped me understand certain aspects of the books. And I appreciate all of you for taking the time to watch my videos and for commenting. So thank you to all of you. Now, if I sound a little croaky, it's because I've got the flu. Would you believe it? Yeah, it's spring here, but I caught the flu. So I might have to take a break in between just to rest my voice. All right, time to talk about The Crippled God. Another chonker. Yeah. Now, I must admit, as I was reading this, I was so anxious, so worried that certain beloved characters would die that it made it for a very tense read. In a good way though, let's be clear, not in a bad way. I like when I'm kind of on the edge of my seat, worrying about characters or what is going to happen, trying to predict how the series is going to end. I failed. By the way, yeah, I failed. Still, so much happens in The Crippled God. And I can understand why people prefer this book to Dust of Dreams. But for me, it did feel like a continuous story. And I loved Dust of Dreams and I loved The Crippled God. So when we start the book, we basically pick up where we left off in Dust of Dreams. We don't know which of the bone hunters have survived. And it's only when Gessler and Stormy and the Kachan Jamal catch up with them that we realize just how many were killed. The bone hunters were decimated. Heartbreaking, really is, because these are characters we have spent so much time with. And whilst I've never thought of myself as a fan of military fantasy as such, I just see it as people fighting wars, as regular human beings with their own fears and joys and sorrows, who are doing what they need to. And in this case, seeing the bone hunters mourning the loss of their comrades, seeing how few are left, how the squads are having to be combined because there's so few left, that made me feel so sad. But that is unfortunately the cost of war. It's the people. And because we have spent time with individual soldiers throughout this series, their death has such a larger impact on you. I think so anyway, because they're not just faceless names, they're actually people we know. No surprise that after their battle with the Narok, I think it is, the short tails, the bone hunters were suffering really low morale. And I loved how just learning that Gessler and Stormy, also bone hunters, and the Kachin Chamal wiped out the rest of the Narok, lifted their spirits because they needed her. There have been hints up to now as to what Tavor's purpose is in travelling to Kalans. And we find out, finally, that it is to free the crippled God's heart, which has been chained on top of the spire, which is controlled by the Forkle Assail. I've spoken before about my feelings for the crippled God. Initially, in the very first book or second book, I thought he was the villain of the piece, but it was, I think, the third or fourth book that I realized he was to be pitied. He was a victim. He was chained, tortured, despite his actions, which were in many ways harmful to some of the characters that we are reading about. I cannot blame him for any course of action that he took to escape. I think anyone would do the same, if not more so. And even though we had been told that the reason he was chained was to stop him destroying this world, we find out in this book that that is not true. That instead, the gods, those horrible gods, have been utilizing the crippled God's power for their own purposes, to increase their own power. Even though his blood is poisoning this world. This to me seemed a metaphor for our own destruction of nature. Regardless of the consequences, the costs for future generations, we are destroying our world for power, usually, or money. And it isn't just about the resources and destruction of the lands. I also felt that Steven Erikson had a lot to say about our disrespect of the animals of our world. How we don't care, or don't seem to care, that we will drive a species to extinction. Now I know that some species naturally become extinct, But it is different when we cause that, when we as humans cause that. And because I agree with him, I loved that he brought up this theme of caring for the world that we inhabit, caring for the animals as well as the environment. Now, Tavor. So as you guys know, because I'm assuming you've read The Crippled God if you're watching this review, she splits her forces into three. Bryce, the Lothario and the Volcando and the Bargast are heading in one direction. Gessler, the Kachan Jamal, are heading towards the spire itself, and Tavor and the Bone Hunters are going through the glass desert, which apparently no one survives crossing. And this journey was grueling. Grueling. In many ways it reminded me of the Chain of Dogs. But in some ways it was even harder because they ran out of water. People were dying. And I thought, why? Why is she doing this when there's clearly other ways to reach Collins? And I came to the conclusion that through suffering, through deprivations, her soldiers might come to understand what the Crippled God has been going through, and it might lead them to feel more compassion for him. Because no other explanation made sense to me, and they did suffer. And suffering always brings out the best and the worst in humanity, and Blistic was the worst, no doubts about it. And I think what I find unforgivable in his behaviour is that he is a fist, a leader who is supposed to lead by example. And he was the one who tried to kill that lovely sergeant who always makes me laugh, who was in control of the supplies. And I thought, really? This is the lengths you will go to? But that is realistic. Some people will do anything to survive. Anything, including murder. History has shown us that. And Blistic's attitude of contempt for Tavor, even planning her death, that all is in line with someone who doesn't trust their leader and who is extremely selfish and uncaring about anything but his own survival. He's also, I guess, a symbol of the bone hunters who were doubting Tavor, wondering what she was doing because she does not explain her decisions to them. She does not explain why she is going through the glass desert, for example. I guess she shouldn't have to, right? She is their leader. Either they will feel bound to her, loyal to her, and will follow her, or they won't. It was a risk that Tavor took, but I think she had earned their trust up to then. That's how I always felt. She always seemed to do what was best for the bone hunters. So Blistic I loathed. Yeah, I think most people do. And yet he was a soldier that I actually liked from the Chain of Dogs. I liked the actions he took. He seemed courageous. And yet, in the end, it seemed clear that he wasn't. That, sure, he was courageous behind the walls of Aaron, because he could be, but not so much so when he had to put his own life on the line. I'll come back to the bone hunters again, but I wanted to talk now about the Sheikh, the Tisliason. Oh, the Sheikh. Oh, wow. So brave. So determined. Their battle with the Malazan was incredibly well described and truly heartbreaking, I felt. Their courage was uplifting, especially Yadan. Him and the Queen, their actions just inspired so much loyalty from their followers, and I totally understand that. And then on the other hand, we have the Malazan, who just seem out for power. I'm still not 100% sure what their motivations are, other than entering this world and taking over Karkanas as a victory over the Tist and I'm assuming that's what it's all about, this rivalry between the two Tist. I have despised the Malazan from their very introduction. They seemed far too self-righteous, holier than thou, with little room for compassion or even logic. And that was reinforced in this book. Their leader didn't care who died as long as he got to sit on the throne. It was all about power for him. And even though some of his close advisors didn't agree with him, they didn't argue. Not really. I guess the question arises, do you follow orders even though you think they are wrong? Clearly the Malazan felt it didn't matter. And yet the cost to the Malazan was, at least at the beginning, mainly the lower classes, the workers. Always is, isn't it? The common soldier, not necessarily the elite, the officers. So I really loved reading about this battle, but I was cheering for the Sheikh, and yet I knew that they couldn't survive, that the numbers just weren't in their favour. And I kept thinking, where are the Tist and I didn't understand why they weren't there fighting this battle. They knew it was coming. Why the hell didn't they get there earlier? They do arrive, as we know. But of course there's more complications because this is Malazan and nothing is straightforward here. The Queen, I can never remember her name, calls upon a dragon that is turning everyone into mindless beasts, or at least turning all the other Elend into mindless beasts. I definitely would like to know more about how the Elend work, how the dragons, their structure, etc. is, because it doesn't fully make sense. But something I did learn, which I really appreciated, was learning how the Tist became soul taken, that there is a price to pay for those who do become soul taken, and yet they seem to be different from pure dragons, from pure Elend. Yeah, I need to know more. I really do. And that is something I noticed with this book, is it doesn't answer every single question that we have. There are still a lot of things left unexplained or mysterious, which is fine. Sometimes you can't have all the answers. One of my favourite scenes was after they finally beat back the Malazan, who I have to admit I have no compassion for. I just thought they were the worst in, I'll call them humanity for ease, because they were far too fanatical, just like the fulcrum wassail. But that scene where the Tist and I knelt to the Sheikh, I loved that scene so much because we lost Yedem, that wonderful, wonderful soldier. And yet to see that the Tist Anda respected the Sheikh for what they did, appreciated what they did, yeah, that was a wonderful moment. One of my favourites. Gruntle, Mappo, and the Trig-Gale. That scene where that horrible bone caster, I can never remember her name, took Tool's son, and none of them would step up. Not Gruntle, not Mappo, nor the Trig-Gale Guild. It was only Torrent who went to help the children. I guess it shows that when push comes to shove, when the choices are to do what we want, what we feel we have to do, over doing the right thing, not everyone chooses doing the right thing. Because I got to admit, I was quite disappointed in Mappo. I thought him, of all people, would have tried to protect these kids. Gruntle the same. You can argue they had other imperatives. Gruntle to fight Kaliva because of Trag, and Mappo to find Icarium. But still, they abandoned these children. They really did. And Gruntle's fight with Kaliva, I'm still not exactly sure why Trag wanted Gruntle to stop Kaliva, other than because he was worried, Trag I mean, that the Tatteral Dragon would destroy this world. I've always liked Gruntle from Memories of Ice. I am not surprised he was in love with Stoney. That seemed quite evident to me. But it just seemed sad that he didn't really get a choice, that Trag was writing him, forcing him into this action against Kaliva. As for Mappo, I have to talk about Mappo. Whilst I couldn't admire his decision not to protect the children, that he was more determined to find Icarium because he was, obsessed with Icarium? Because he cared more about Icarium than anyone else? I found that took away a little bit of my admiration of this character who has suffered to protect his friend all this time. And yet, in the end, he doesn't even get to see or talk to Icarium. And what is most tragic is that Icarium forgot him. Oh, that broke my heart. All that Mappo went through to protect Icarium, to protect this world, and in the end Icarium forgot him. That was heartbreaking, just heartbreaking. But this book made me cry so much. And I'm usually not the kind of reader who does cry over books. However, when I'm attached to characters, to a world, I can't help but be emotional. And honestly, there was a stage where I cried 4 days in a row as I was reading this book because something happened to cause me to fight back tears or to not be able to read because my eyes are swimming in tears. That also is a sign of just how much I love the book, the series. but Mappo's story, or Mappo's end, was just heartrending. And I carry him. I also find it extremely sad that Icarium had forgotten Mappo, one of his greatest friends who he's had sharing his life for so many years. And Ubla, is it Ubla? I can never remember his name either. Yeah, I'm not sure what I think of him as a companion for Icarium, because he's just so silly or stupid in many ways. But perhaps Icarium doesn't need anything more than that. I really don't know. Ubla, Pong and Draconis, they were so different, and yet you can't help but admire Ubla Pong because he was so innocent in many ways. Very straightforward. He couldn't think beyond very simple ideas. That's what it seemed like to me. His companion, the Barghast, oh wow, yeah. She just epitomizes the worst of the Barghast, if you ask me, definitely. Regardless, I guess it was to be expected that he would end up being the new companion of Icarium, and that this is just what has happened over the eons. Icarium's companion dies, a new one is found for him. However, things are different now, aren't they? So I guess we don't know where Icarium's storyline will go. And whilst part of me was expecting Icarium to be part of the final battle with the Forkruler Sail, in a way, I'm actually glad he wasn't. I'm actually glad that his story went in a different direction. Whilst he was very powerful, it would have been too easy to have him kind of win the fight for everyone else. He did enough in Dust of Dreams. And I guess the same could be said about Casa. He also played a very minor role in this book, and yet it was pivotal. I will get to that in a moment. I wanted to talk about the last battles towards the end of this review. Now I think we should talk about the Snake Children, which I said in my review of Dust of Dreams I didn't enjoy reading about. It is difficult reading about children suffering so severely that they're malnutritioned, that they're dying of thirst, that they're having to eat their own. And I was never certain if their story was one from the past or the present, and we find out that it is the present. When Fiddler saw them and was weeping at the state they were in, I was crying with him because I could just imagine it. It was different thinking they might have been a story from the past, and it was different seeing them in the present. That any children would have to go through something like that. And Fiddler, Fiddler just cemented yet again, or reminded me yet again why he is my favourite character in this series. That he was even willing to waste water by giving it to the baby that was dead. Oh, that whole chapter with the Snake Children and the Bone Hunters, with the boys from the Conjure, I think, who were giving up their own water to all these children. Oh, I'm getting emotional just talking about it. To me, that was one of the most powerful scenes in this book. about compassion, how we are capable of such sacrifice, self-sacrifice, when our compassion is aroused. I love that scene so much, but what Tavor said, that they're now our children, oh, yeah, it was just one punch after another this chapter. I was just so emotional reading about it. And then we find out that these children have forgotten what toys are. They have forgotten how to play. Talk about plucking at your heartstrings, and also this very vivid, visceral reminder of the cost of war, not just to adults, but to children, to innocents. We forget that sometimes, that children also suffer when there is a war. And that no child ever should have to go through something like that, even a small fraction of that. Definitely one of my favourite chapters throughout the Crippled God, and one of the most emotional. It affected me as much as the Chain of Dogs did. Yeah, I couldn't stop crying. Yeah, let's put it that way. Now I have to mention Genoa's. Yeah, Genoa's parent. That's how I pronounce his name anyway. And Kalam and Quick Ben. I think I had just read about the snake children, the toys, and I'd been bawling over that, and in the very next chapter, right at the beginning, I was laughing because of Quick Ben and Kalam. And I think this is true to life. You can go from tears to laughter very quickly. I think sometimes you need to. It's a release of all these emotions that you're feeling, these overwhelming emotions. But I loved having Kalam back. He has never been a favourite character of mine, but I do adore his and Quick Ben's relationship. I just love it. Yeah. And Kalam's long-suffering wife, yeah, I'm not a fan of hers, but nevertheless, he had people who loved him, and his role in the battles, I should say, yeah, wow, that was so good, and it was needed. The Forkruller Sale were extremely powerful. They could mesmerize people just with their voice. How do you find something like that? So I love that Paran decided, yeah, we're going to do sneak attacks. We are going to assassinate them, not fight them directly, because they were outnumbered. So even though at times Kalam and Quick Ben's repartee was humorous, you needed it. You needed it to lighten the mood occasionally, because it got so grim and dark at times. And Paran, he has grown so much throughout this series. He is definitely one of my favourite characters. I loved how he dealt with the Forkruller Sale. I loved how he planned his attacks. He was a great military leader. He deserved the role of High Fist. Let's talk about the Greyhounds. It seemed quite obvious to me that the Shield was going to turn the Greyhounds against Krugava at some point. The way he did it, oh, such a slime bucket. He really was just the worst, I guess, in humanity in some ways. He was all about ambition and about fame or being recognised, and not about what was best for the soldiers, for the Greyhounds. So I wasn't surprised that he turned the troops against Krugava, but I do think he was quite unfair to her. What did surprise me, however, was that the Greyhounds in the ships who landed at Collins just agreed to follow the Fork-Ruler sail. That I did not understand. Perhaps one of the reasons is that when it comes to any form of fanaticism, it's not logical, and they thought that the Fork-Ruler sail were more justified. I really don't know. But that whole storyline, that betrayal, it also illustrated for me the issues with fanaticism. And speaking of fanatics, the Fork-Ruler sail, I need to talk about them. They were made irredeemable throughout this series, but we didn't know much about them. I think we first met a live one in House of Chains. I think Casa freed one. And all of a sudden, they're the big bad. They are the antagonists throughout these last 2 books. I would have liked a little bit more background on them. I would have liked to have seen more of them earlier to make them a more powerful antagonist, a more nuanced antagonist. But that is one of my criticisms of the Crippled God, is that they weren't nuanced. They were just fanatical and they were extreme, which is usually what fanatics are. But there was hardly any dissension amongst their ranks. Their view of justice, and I've said it before, is not justice, it is basically judgment, which comes from arrogance. This assumption that they and their view is the right one. They have judged humanity as not worth living, so they need to wipe all of humanity out. Who appointed them judge? I think it simply shows what can happen with fanaticism. They can become so self-righteous that they believe they have the right to judge every single person who lives. And they make no allowances for any differences, even minor ones, between, say, one person and another. They've tarred everyone with the same brush, and this is the kind of narrow-minded, short-sighted view that fanatics have, that they are always right and everyone else is wrong if they don't agree with them. However, I would have definitely liked more nuance, particularly with the leaders that we met in these last few books. I wanted more. I wanted to understand a little bit more how they could have reached that extreme where they actually killed their own God. Their own God, yeah. And ultimately, I came to the conclusion this was not about cleansing the world because humanity is a disease. This was about power. Always. It's always about power. This was about them being at the top and controlling everything. Most of the gods, elder gods included, were only interested in utilizing the Crippled God's heart for their own ends. They didn't care what price he paid. They didn't care the pain it caused him. They just wanted to be all-powerful. So I'm glad that some of them got their comeuppance because they deserved it, like Kilmandaros and her son. What happened to Erastus? Because boy, did I want him to die. I really did. He does not deserve to live. He has caused so many issues throughout this series. But I wanted him to die more even than Kilmandaros. And I love that Draconis was the one who killed her. That even though we were told for much of this series that Draconis had not behaved well in the past, and you know what? I can't recall what he did, but we know he was trapped in Dragnapur. Even he knew this was not the right thing to do, to releasing the eternal dragon, which is destroying this world. The eternal dragon. Karabos? I cannot remember her name. This tragic figure, this volunteer. Now my understanding is the eternal dragon was required to balance the Crippled God's poisoned blood. That's my understanding. And I could be wrong, of course. But this was a character, a dragon, that I could not help but feel so sorry for. She wasn't to blame for what she was. She didn't want to destroy this world. She didn't want to fight her kin, but she had no choice. I found her storyline. I found this character, this eternal dragon, just heartbreaking. From the moment we first saw them all chained to this. And that was a major theme throughout this series, is chains. So I'm not surprised that the Crippled God felt empathy for this dragon. And I love that Silja's Ruin actually fought beside the eternal dragon. That was a really nice touch, if you ask me. But there were a lot of great touches throughout this book that brought together so many of the threads throughout this series, brought together many of the storylines and the characters. We even got to see Krupe, who helped Torrent by giving him a bow that killed that horrible bone caster. I mean, there's just so much to cover in this book. There's no way I can do it full justice. Not unless I talk for 5 hours. Let's now talk about the finale. Tavor and the Bone Hunters fighting the Fulcral Assail. Fiddler and the Bone Hunters protecting the Crippled God. Oh, one of my favourite parts in the book. We actually got to hear more of the Crippled God's perspective, and immediately he seemed reasonable. He seemed kind-hearted, appreciative of the efforts of these humans to protect him. I expected that, of course, and immediately you feel this compassion for this broken figure. This Crippled God has suffered more than anyone throughout this series, and he suffered for thousands of years with no respite, with no compassion from these gods who've chained him. No justification for what happened to the Crippled God. None. It's not like he invaded this world. He was, I think, drawn by accident, and then he is chained and tortured for thousands of years for his power. I hate these gods, all of them. I really do. And whilst Corral obviously felt compassion because he helped release him at the end, and Mole did, let's not forget that Mole beat up the Crippled God at the end of Midnight Tides because he tried to manipulate events to secure his freedom. My battery died in the middle of a sentence. I was talking about Mal, actually. I'm a little ambivalent about Mal. He's done a 180. I can understand your attitude changing towards another, that seeing Tavor's devotion to doing the right thing, to releasing the crippled God, humbled him, as it should. But people do change. I guess even gods change. Even they can realize they were wrong. And this is the difference, I think, between the humans in this world and the gods. The humans were more capable of compassion for a god than the other gods were. They showed up, all the gods, they humbled the gods with their capacity for compassion and their determination to fight for the right thing, to do the right thing, even if it cost them their lives, their willingness to sacrifice to do the right thing. And that is contrasted so sharply with the folklore Assail, who have no compassion, simply their belief that they are right and everyone else is wrong. I think any justice in this world has to be tempered by understanding and compassion. And I loved that it was the humans who displayed that and not any of the gods or greater beings. That was a major theme throughout this book, I feel. That these gods that are worshipped don't necessarily deserve that worship, especially as they take no action. And if they do take action, it is usually for their own benefit, certainly not for the benefit of their followers. Now, I forgot to mention Gessler and Stormy. Oh, they broke my heart. Their deaths broke my heart. Sin was a symbol of the worst of the gods, who just wanted more power. Because she did. Because she enjoyed it. Who didn't care about using her power and who she hurt, who she killed. That Stormy stopped her and sacrificed himself. The relationship between Stormy and Gessler was one of my favourites throughout this series. They were like brothers who squabbled all the time but always had each other's backs. And I loved it. But wow, the effect on Gessler, on knowing that Stormy was dead, his willingness to sacrifice himself to stop the folklore Assail. Any sacrifice like that is going to make me emotional. Boy, did I love that it was Hood. Hood, who was human or alive again, killed this pure. I loved that, actually. It kind of leaves it open as to what Hood is going to do in the future. And I love that it is the bridge burners who are now guarding Hood's Gate. I also have to talk about the Talani Mass, who actually aligned with the Jagged even and the Kachain Jamal to defeat the folklore Assail. And they're also made alive again, or Imas. So many great things happen in this book. It was like wow, I can't catch my breath. And I was trying to keep track of it all and try to figure out where is it going to go. I did find it sad that most of the MS were killed. I was glad that Tul survived. But how Hetan is still alive, I don't understand. I know Tok did that, but I thought she was killed. And Tok, he was such a tragic figure throughout this series. I've loved Tok from the beginning, and I hated that he was killed and something less when he was dead. But there was a scene near the end where Whiskey Jack says to him, "You're one of us, you're a bridge burner now." And wow. Yeah, another wonderful, wonderful moment. And this book was just full of them. Tragic, where you cry your eyes out, or you are extremely emotional, and yet very uplifting as well. So finally, I need to talk about the Crippled God, who acknowledges, admires, even respects these humans who are so much less than him, who are willing to sacrifice their lives to do the right thing, to free him. I loved that aspect of this book and this series, that whilst there is the two extremes in human nature, in these gods, whilst there are fanatics and there is cruelty and violence, there is also nobility. Fiddler and his bone hunters protecting the Crippled God. I loved that so much. It is the epitome of human nature, the best of human nature. Even the Kalan soldiers who were fighting them, knowing that the bone hunters were so outnumbered and yet would never give up, even they respected the bone hunters. The Forkruller Sale, I had no compassion for, but I did feel sorry for the soldiers because they were under control of these Pures, these horrible, horrible Pures. And I love that I finally learned what the Book of the Fallen means. That it means those who support or identify with the Crippled God, who care more about doing the right thing rather than power, rather than their own survival. Here we have Carol and Mal, and then Cotillion stabbed the Crippled God. And for a moment I was like, hang on, what? Why did he kill him? And then I realized, no, that wasn't him destroying or trying to destroy the Crippled God. It was because he couldn't survive in the body that he had. And it was obvious that all this time, everything that has happened throughout these 10 books was manipulated by Shadow Throne and Cotillion to do the right thing by this God, this Crippled God, to help this world, and maybe even to teach some of the other gods a lesson that humans are not just their playthings, that they and their lives are just as important as a god's and should be treasured, should be valued. But I must admit, for a moment, I thought, oh no. Yeah. Tavor. I need to speak about Tavor. She was always a very difficult character to know because I don't think we ever saw her perspective. And she was mysterious, didn't share with her troops what she was doing. So a lot of people questioned her, didn't know whether to have faith in her or not. But that is also a leader's role, to take on that burden, that responsibility of knowing what the stakes are. And she knew that the stakes were that if the crippled God's heart was used, it could destroy this world. But she was also driven by compassion, by caring, to end the suffering of another person or another being. She was such a wonderful, wonderful character. And I think if you had any doubts about who Tavor was, when she said, "They're our children now," about the snake children, that showed me once again who Tavor was. But it was I think one of the final scenes at the end of the battle with the Crippled God, when Genoas, her brother, finds her and she broke down about Malazan. Oh, wow, that was one of the most emotional scenes for me, because she has never broken down until then. It showed yet again how much this woman felt, and which no one gave her credit for. Oh, so good. So good. So many great moments throughout this book, including the epilogues. Getting to see the aftermath of this battle, what is happening to some of these characters, Whiskey Jack and Corlat, and the way all the bridge burners were willing to kill her because they thought she was giving up her love for Whiskey Jack. Oh, this loyalty between these soldiers is what makes, I think, military fantasy work so well for me, because I value friendship more than anything. And seeing these friendships, the willingness to die for each other, to sacrifice for each other, I love that. Definitely love that. I do have a couple of criticisms about this book. One was that it's been so long since I read the earlier books that I couldn't recall who was involved in the chaining of the Crippled God. I couldn't recall what reasons were given in the past. I had a vague notion of it. Whilst I love that Erikson doesn't spoon feed us and drown us in exposition, a reminder of some of these very significant facts that we have read about in the past would have been appreciated. It would have made me remember the significance of some of the characters that we were meeting in these last two books. And the other criticism I have is in relation to the Crippled God. I felt that they needed more fleshing out, more depth to them, more nuance, that they were just villainous and evil and fanatical. And I thought, no creature is usually that extreme. There's some dissent usually. There's some quality that makes them redeemable. There was none with them. And they also hadn't really been a major factor throughout these books. It was only towards the end. If they had played a much larger role earlier, I think I would have enjoyed the conflict between them and the Bone Hunters so much more. Another criticism I have, and this is a personal one and not really any reflection on the books, is Crocus got a happy ending. he doesn't deserve it. No, I don't feel he does. I think others deserved it more than he did, definitely. People like Gruntle or Gessler and Stormy, which, yeah, my heart still hurts when I think about them. But overall, it's only those few minor criticisms that I have of this last book in particular. There was just so many highly charged emotional moments for me. I cried way too much throughout this book. I sobbed at times. I couldn't read at times. And it was just one punch after another, after another, after another. And that comes from being so attached to this story, to this world, to these characters. Always the characters for me. I loved The Crippled God. I particularly loved seeing the perspective of the crippled God himself, of learning more about him and seeing that humans were more capable of compassion, kindness than gods were. I love that the gods were humbled by humans. They deserve to be. And I love seeing so many of these beloved characters still alive. Yeah, I don't know how I would have coped if Fiddler had been killed. I cannot deny it. So I was very pleased to see that he survived the end. But there were so many who were lost. Yeah, and this is the tragedy of wars, is people die. They're gone forever. All right, I think that's all I wanted to say. I may have missed something, so who knows, I may have to come back and record another day, but let's sum up. The Crippled God was both very uplifting, hopeful even, and yet also devastating. It covered the range of emotions. I cried throughout it, I laughed, I was angry, I was sad, I was gutted at times. It covered all of it. Not many books do that. Not many books make you feel that wide range of emotions. Not many books or series make you feel satisfied at the end that the journey was worth it. Because I feel that Steven Erikson took all the threads, all the storylines throughout this series and brought them to a great and very satisfying conclusion. He may not have answered every single question, but I can live with that. I can live with certain things still being mysterious. I can live with not knowing some things because I'm free to speculate then. I guess it also frees the author to write more books in this universe. And I know he has written a few. On Karkanas, there's also the Witness trilogy, I think, with the second book coming out very soon. There are a lot of themes that this series covers, and this book in particular. Many people say it's all about compassion, and I think it's so much more than that. It is about understanding both the frailty and strengths of humans, of human nature, that we are capable of both great and terrible things, and that we need temperance, moderation, always. That whenever we take an extreme position, it will not be justified because it does not allow room for discussion. And if we sat down and talked to each other, we can usually come to some resolution that doesn't involve bloodshed or violence. That our need for power, money, call it what you will, has to also be tempered. That it cannot always be at the expense of people's lives or livelihood or suffering. That never should we turn away from other people's suffering. And that's just to name a few. Chains was also a huge theme throughout this series. And I think it wasn't just the Crippled God's physical chains. It's also those chains that we give to ourselves, which sometimes we need to restrain our baser nature, our baser urges. I loved this book, like I've loved all of them, but it was bittersweet for me because I knew it was the final book in this series. And whilst I feel uplifted with certain of the storylines and their conclusion, I also feel terribly sad that it is over. I just want to experience this all over again. And I don't think I could give this series a higher accolade. I have loved my journey with Malazan. I'm looking forward to rereading it in the future. And I'm also looking forward to reading more books in this universe. Now, of course, I would love to hear what you thought of the Crippled God and what you thought of my review. I know I have left some things out, and most likely I will be doing more videos on the Malazan books in the future. But for now, this will have to do. Yeah. Thank you all so very much for watching. I truly appreciate all of you who've taken the time to watch these videos, to comment. Thank you sincerely. I hope you all have a beautiful day, and I will see you next time. Bye.